The year is 1943. World War II rages across Europe and the Pacific, but deep in the American heartland, an entirely different kind of encounter is about to unfold. Thousands of German prisoners of war, captured on battlefields in North Africa and Europe, found themselves transported across the Atlantic, not to grim prison camps, as they might have imagined, but to the sprawling, sun-baked landscapes of Texas. They were a world away from the war, yet still very much within its confines, their lives now dictated by their captors. This journey itself was disorienting, moving from the chaos of conflict to the vast, quiet plains. They arrived with preconceived notions of America, often shaped by propaganda or limited understanding. Little did they know, Texas had its own brand of chaos, one they were utterly unprepared for. Their understanding of the world was about to be profoundly challenged, not by battle, but by culture. This was a chapter in the war rarely told, a moment of cultural collision. Texas became home to over 400,000 Axis POWs during the war, more than any other state. Camps sprang up across the vast state, from dusty West Texas to the humid East. These weren't Alcatraz-style fortresses. Many were repurposed civilian conservation corps camps, or newly constructed facilities designed to be efficient and secure. The prisoners were put to work, primarily in agriculture, alleviating labor shortages caused by Americans fighting overseas. They picked cotton, harvested vegetables, and helped with ranching. Conditions, by all accounts, were generally fair, often better than what they'd experienced on the front lines, or even back home in war-torn Germany. They had regular meals, albeit sometimes unfamiliar American fare, and access to medical care. Morale varied, of course, but the routine provided a semblance of normalcy. The landscape itself was a stark contrast to their homelands. One day, an unusual opportunity arose. Local Texans, eager to maintain some semblance of normalcy, and perhaps even a degree of goodwill, extended invitations for groups of POWs to attend local events. These weren't widespread, but isolated incidents, often organized by specific camp commandants or sympathetic community leaders. The idea was twofold: to expose the prisoners to American culture, perhaps subtly demonstrating the freedoms and traditions they were fighting against, and also to provide a morale boost, both for the prisoners and for the local communities who sometimes felt disconnected from the war. For the German soldiers, who had spent months or years in a controlled environment, the prospect of leaving the camp, even under guard, was a rare and intriguing one. They had no idea what a rodeo was. The concept was entirely alien. A small convoy of military trucks or buses, escorted by armed guards, transported the chosen group of German POWs to a nearby Texas town. The journey itself was an experience. They passed through small towns they'd never seen, past endless fields, and under the wide, open Texas sky. The civilians they saw on the roads or in the towns looked different, dressed differently, and spoke a language they mostly didn't understand. The air was filled with the smell of dust, dry grass, and perhaps the distant scent of barbecue. As they approached the rodeo grounds, the sounds began to change, a distant murmur of a crowd, snippets of country music, and then, distinctly, the loud, excited shouts and cheers. This was unlike any public gathering they had ever witnessed, certainly nothing like a parade or a military review. Their anticipation, mixed with bewilderment, grew with every mile. Stepping out of the vehicles, the sensory overload was immediate. The aroma of popcorn and grilled meat mixed with the scent of horses and livestock. A vast, dusty arena, surrounded by grandstands filled with boisterous crowds, stretched before them. Cowboys and cowgirls, dressed in their distinctive hats, boots, and chaps, moved with an easy confidence, tending to horses and cattle. Flags waved, music blared from loudspeakers, and the sheer energy of the event was palpable. It was a kaleidoscope of sights and sounds completely alien to their European sensibilities. They looked at each other, confused, trying to make sense of the spectacle. There were no marching formations, no military uniforms beyond those of their guards, no visible signs of what they understood as training. This was a world they simply could not reconcile with their experiences. The rodeo began with a grand procession. Flag bearers on horseback, often carrying American and Texan flags, rode around the arena. The national anthem played, and the crowd rose, many placing hands over their hearts. This part, the display of national pride, they could understand, even if it was for a different nation. But then came the rider introductions, the fancy riding demonstrations, and the general fanfare that preceded the main events. It was loud, colorful, and utterly without the rigid discipline they associated with any form of military display. The looseness, the informal cheers, the individualistic flair of the riders, it all seemed so unstructured. What was the purpose of this elaborate, almost theatrical prelude? Was this some kind of psychological conditioning? A warm-up for something more serious? The questions swirled in their minds. Then came the bareback riding. A chute gate burst open, and a powerful horse, often wild and unbroken, exploded into the arena, a rider clinging on with seemingly impossible tenacity. The horse bucked, twisted, and spun, desperate to throw its human burden. The rider, in turn, fought to stay on for the required 8 seconds, displaying incredible strength, balance, and resilience. For the German POWs, this was the moment clarity began to form, albeit a mistaken one. They saw the raw power of the horses and the disciplined struggle of the riders. Some must have thought, this is it. This is how the Americans train their soldiers for extreme conditions. They are learning to control powerful animals, to endure violent shocks, to develop incredible core strength and balance. This must be horse resistance training or anti-cavalry conditioning. It was the only explanation that fit their military-focused worldview. If bareback riding was horse resistance, then bull riding pushed the theory further. The sheer size and power of the bulls, often weighing over a ton, was staggering. The riders, smaller in comparison, grappled with these immense beasts, again trying to stay mounted for 8 perilous seconds. The crashes were spectacular, the danger undeniable. Men were thrown high into the air, narrowly escaping injury as the bulls charged and stomped. This, they would have concluded, is an advanced stage of their training. This is a test of sheer will, of courage under extreme duress. It teaches men to withstand shock, to face overwhelming force without flinching. It's a brutal, but effective, way to weed out the weak and temper the strong for battle. The danger was too real to be mere entertainment in their eyes. Then came calf roping. A calf bursts from a chute. A mounted cowboy gives chase, expertly swings a lariat, ropes the calf, dismounts at a full gallop, and then quickly ties 3 of the calf's legs, all against the clock. This, to the military mind, presented another fascinating tactical exercise. They are practicing rapid capture techniques. A German soldier might have reasoned. They are owning their skills in pursuit, immobilization, and quick dismounting, perhaps for capturing enemy agents or disrupting supply lines. The lasso is a unique weapon, and the speed is paramount. This is clearly a demonstration of efficiency and precision under pressure. The frantic pace and the precise execution seemed undeniably strategic. Steer wrestling, or bulldogging, presented another puzzle that fit their evolving theory. A cowboy on horseback gallops alongside a steer, then leaps from his horse onto the steer, grabbing its horns and wrestling it to the ground. The sheer audacity and strength required were impressive. This must be for neutralizing large, dangerous targets, they surmised. Imagine this steer is an enemy vehicle or a particularly resistant foe. The soldier has to close the distance, engage directly, and bring it down with brute force and technique. It's a close-quarters combat drill, demonstrating how to overcome a powerful opponent by sheer physical dominance and leverage. A very aggressive form of hand-to-hand combat against a moving target. The physicality was undeniable. What continued to confuse them, even as they formed their military training hypothesis, was the glaring absence of traditional military elements. Where were the guns? Where were the formal uniforms? Why the elaborate hats and fringed chaps? If this was indeed military training, why the almost theatrical presentation? They would have pondered these inconsistencies. Perhaps it was a special forces unit, training in plain clothes to blend in. Or maybe it was a new, unconventional form of warfare they hadn't encountered. The specific tools, lassos instead of rifles, Horses instead of jeeps were also perplexing, but they fit the idea of specialized rural combat. The civilians in the stands, cheering on these trainees, must be an elaborate support network, or perhaps part of the psychological effect. Meanwhile, the local Texans, who sometimes noticed the groups of German POWs in a dead section of the stands, were largely unaware of the elaborate military theories unfolding in their minds. Some might have felt a fleeting pity for the enemy soldiers, others a sense of patriotic duty. But mostly, they saw these men as prisoners of war, a curiosity, a testament to America's reach in the conflict. If any local had overheard the Germans discussing shock endurance or rapid capture drills, they would have been utterly baffled and probably highly amused. For the Texans, this was pure entertainment, a celebration of their ranching heritage, a test of skill and bravery, yes, but certainly not military training. The cultural chasm was immense, leading to a profound misunderstanding on both sides. As the rodeo continued, and perhaps after seeing the sheer joy and competitive spirit, the laughter, and the familial atmosphere, some of the more observant or open-minded POWs might have started to question their initial assumptions. They saw children participating in smaller events, grandmothers cheering, and cowboys high-fiving after a good ride, or dusting themselves off with a grin after a spectacular fall. This didn't quite fit the grim seriousness of military drills. The prize money, announced over the loudspeakers, and the sheer spectacle of it all began to hint at something else. Perhaps this wasn't training. Perhaps it was a game, an elaborate, dangerous, but ultimately recreational competition. The seed of doubt would have been planted, challenging their rigid military framework. Eventually, the rodeo concluded, and the POWs were escorted back to their camps. The experience would have been a vivid, unforgettable memory. Whether they fully grasped the true nature of a rodeo that day or not, the images and sounds were seared into their minds. It was a bizarre, bewildering, and utterly unique glimpse into American culture, far removed from the war they were fighting or the Germany they remembered. It became a story they would tell each other in the barracks, perhaps with exaggerated details or continued theories. You wouldn't believe what the Americans do for training. They might have started. It was a moment of surreal cultural exchange, a testament to the strange pockets of normalcy that could exist even amidst global conflict. The anecdote of German POWs mistaking a Texas rodeo for military training is more than just a humorous footnote in history. It highlights the profound cultural differences that existed, and still exist, between nations. It shows how one's worldview, shaped by upbringing and experience, can dramatically alter the interpretation of something completely foreign. For those German soldiers, whose lives were defined by military structure and purpose, the wild, individualistic, and deeply traditional spectacle of a rodeo could only be rationalized through the lens of combat preparation. It was an unexpected culture shock, a moment of profound misinterpretation that offered a unique, if unintended, lesson in the vast and varied tapestry of human experience, even during humanity's darkest hours.